event. We got a couple of new presentations that are coming out in the Sips and Tricks, and you can see those listed there on your screen. And some of them may not be up and registered yet because we just came out with them this morning, and we got about another 5 or 6 that we also put out there this morning that will start in May as well. So we're going to continue this for a while, and bring you guys some great IBMI education, and we hope that helps. So Steve and I are going to talk a little bit about backup and recovery, and this is something we do all the time. We're always doing backup and recovery, and I think the number of systems that we do a recovery for, whether it's a migration going from Power 8 to a Power 9, or whether we're just helping a client with a recovery, is just amazing, and it gives us a good handle on understanding it. Because what do you do backups for? You do backups in the event that just in case you ever have to restore something, you have that information. So Steve and I are going to kind of slice and dice the backup side. We're also going to come follow through with that to make sure you understand what you need when you're doing a restore, because the pieces don't tie exactly one-to-one. They do, but you don't call them sometimes the same thing. So we're going to go through that, and we're going to use the old poster that's been around for probably 40 years. And Steve, I'm going to see if I can move that to my other screen.
Sure.
Easier probably said than done.
All right. Well, while you're doing that, it's kind of neat. So I posted a different version of this one on LinkedIn. I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago, I suppose. And just saving your system. And it was interesting because I got a lot of feedback on it, and I took a look last night, and it had something like 13,000 views. I'm thinking, wow, because people are really concerned about what am I backing up, and number 2, can I recover from it? So it's, like you said, it's been around forever. I remember seeing it on server room walls, data center walls, office walls, because it used to come out as a poster, and you can print this off yourself. Actually, we can probably send this out to everybody at the end of the presentation. I suppose no harm doing that. But it basically tells you everything about how am I going to save and restore this system. This poster is a standard native IBMI command reference for save and restore. It also has the BRMS save and restore equivalents on the right-hand side. So for in interest of time, we've got 30 minutes, Pete. We'll probably stick to standard. Oh, you lost it.
Did I lose it, or no? It's still there, right?
No, it's back again.
Okay. I just clicked on something. That's why. Okay.
That's okay.
So Steve, why don't you talk a little bit about? Let's talk about Save 21, 22, 23, because people use those terms just like all the time, and let's make sure everybody understands what those are.
Sure. So let's clear something up real quick, because when we see sometimes you hear somebody say save sys and full system save and use them interchangeably like they're the same thing. They're not. They're not the same thing. A save 21 is a full system save, and that is exactly what it says it is. It gets all components of the system from the go save 21 command. So when you run that, you're getting the operating system, the license, internal code, all the IBM objects, all of your objects, IFS, DLO, and everything in between. Okay, so that's the big kahuna. When people say, should I do a save sys versus a full system save? It all depends on what your tolerance is, right? So if you have a very, very small amount of windows for downtime to get a save 21, they're a lot harder to come by. But they really should be part of your strategy in order to get regular. And I don't care how long in between you do them are, as long as you can, number one, get to the tape, and number one, be able to confirm what's on the tape. Because the longer a tape is sitting out there on a shelf, the less confidence you're going to have of what you think is on that tape and reality is. It may be overwritten. It may be corrupted somehow. Somebody may have put it on a big gigantic magnet for all I know, and you might have some troubles recovering from it. Now that's a save 21. That's a full system. So a save 22, I refer to that as more of a save sys type of backup, because you're getting all the IBM objects. Okay, so you're getting the license internal code, the operating system. You're getting the save sec data components of that. All right, so that's your security data, your user profiles, private authorities. It's going to do a save config, and that's essentially the save 22. But you're also going to get outside of that. That's kind of hard for me to see the screen, so I'm going to bring it up a little bit here to make sure I'm not missing much. So the save 22 also as well gets your save live IBM. It's going to get the IBM directories in the IFS, and you're covered from a 22. A 23, that's all of your user objects. Okay, so that's your information. So any IBM libraries like Garbage Pail Library, QGPL, QuseRsys, and a lot of things like output queues are in there. They're IBM, but they're also yours. So those are backed up with the all user and your user-based IFS directories, DLOs, and that's basically it. So a save 23 and a save 22 is essentially the equivalent of a save 21.
Right. And I think the biggest thing in my mind is, a save 21, you need to be doing it from the console, and you need to be doing it in a restricted state, because a save sys has to happen in a restricted state, as well as a save lib star non-sys. You can run a save 23 because it's just security data config, it's the all users and the DLO and the IFS. You can run that in a non-restricted state. You do have to be careful that nothing else is using those libraries. Otherwise, whether just because you're in a non-restricted state doesn't mean you're going to have all the objects are going to be unlocked. So that's my always thing. I always know the difference.
Well, maybe you know this, because I'm just thinking here from a save while active standpoint. Does the automated, like if I do a go save 23, is it save while active or is it not save while active?
I know it's not save while active.
That's the trouble. See, so if you're going to do the equivalent of the save 23 or the equivalent plus, then when you're creating your CL program to do a save live or all user, you'll want to do a save while active if at all possible. Same thing with the IFS, right? Some things you're not going to get when you back up the IFS. I don't care, save while active, whatever. HTTP log files, WebSphere log files, things that are in use and you will not get a lock on. MySQL objects, for instance, right? You've got to shut down MySQL to get that. There's one big object. I can't remember the name of it now, but it's a big honking MySQL object. And if you're still using MySQL, you're not getting that with the system up. You've got to shut down MySQL and then get that as part of your backup. So you might have to play with your actual backup, read the output after the backup is done, and determine if there are any locks. Well, you might have to throw a couple of shutdowns in the middle of your backup, be a little more granular, shut it down, back it up, restart it again, move on to the next save command.
Right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about I'm going to talk a little bit about SaveSys, because SaveSys, I've heard people say, well, I'm going to do a SaveSys. It takes 45 minutes and I backed up my entire system. That can not be further from the truth. It is not save the entire system. It saved the operating system. So SaveSys is a little bit of a misnomer. And if you think you're getting your entire system, you're not. You're just getting the operating system, actually the LIC, the operating system, the user profiles, the save config. So that's what you're getting there. Now, a couple of things to note. When you're doing a save sys, you have to be in a restricted state, and you can do the save sys. So if you have some time constraints, for instance, you can't get your save security data, or your save security takes a lot of time, you can do a save sys and exclude the save security data and exclude the save config, and then come back when the system's up and do a save security data and a save config. So that this way, when you're in restricted state, you're just getting the license, internal code, and the OS. When you look at the restore portion of it, because if we do a save 21, you'd kind of do a restore 21 to restore everything. And before you can do a restore 21, you have to have the LIC and the OS already established and on the system. And most likely you're going to get that from there. Now, the other place you can get your license internal code and your OS is from your distribution DVDs, the ones that are shipped from IBM. The issue with that is they're not going to have any of your PTFs if you're doing a recovery, so they wouldn't be on there. If you do your save sys and you restore from the OS and the LIC from the save sys, you're going to have all the PTFs you had when you went to save it. So, you know, that's the thing with the save sys. And you use portions of the save security data to restore the user profiles, and then you use it later on in the restore process to restore the authorities to all the individual objects that had private authorities to it, and that's the restore authority command. So that's kind of what we get from there. Let's talk a little bit, Steve, about save live non-sys, whether it's the star IBM or star all user, and how those kind of come together, because that's kind of the 21, the 22, the 23 at the library level.
Yeah, and a lot of arrows in there. Kind of, it's nice how this really lays it out, because it gives it so nicely. So when you're doing a save live non-sys, okay, so the save live non-sys, I'm having a tongue twister today. So that's comprised of both the save live star IBM and the save live star all user. And you know, from a save live non-sys, you do need to be in a restricted state in order to do the non-sys, if I'm not mistaken. You know, your all user you can do with the system up. So what, you know, we had a great conversation with a customer there about 2 weeks ago. He had some ransomware in his network, so we had to poke around the system, and he's looking to recover. And we said, well, let's look at your backup program. And he was backing up, you know, maybe 5 or 6 libraries. And I said, well, can you recover your entire system from that? And he said, well, it's the production files. I said, yes, but can you recover, you know, any of the ancillary files, anything you might need, source files, things like that? And the answer is probably a no, because if you have 200 libraries and you're only saving 6, why do you have those extra 194 libraries on your system for? So, you know, my recommendation is, well, if you can run a save live star all user as part of your nightly backup routine, if you have, you know, number one, the time, or if you're running it with a save while active there, the time is kind of a non-issue, or can be a non-issue. So, you know, your mileage may vary with that, but it runs a heck of a lot better than it used to do 20 years ago, for sure. So a save all user, save live all user is highly recommended if you can do it on a regular basis. Now, the save live IBM, it's a little less needed unless you're doing something more invasive. Let's say you're doing PTFs regular and things like that. I would like to see the save live IBM done as part of that, or doing it before it. But that save live IBM is going to be taken care of with your save option 22. So your quote unquote save sys. Okay, so saving the operating system, the LIC, IBM license programs. I always like to get a save 22 before we do PTFs at the very least. That covers my save live star IBM, and it also covers my LIC and my OS. So I'm guaranteed, at least if I'm going to change something with a PTF, that's going to be taken care of with the save 22.
Correct. And even after an OS upgrade, I prefer to get a save 21, because it's a great new starting point. If I can't, I would at least like to get a 22, because that's kind of what we just changed. We put a new OS in, we've changed the LIC, the OS, the license programs, and some stuff in the IFS as well. So the 22 is a good place. The 23 is the better place. Remember, after you do an OS upgrade, you can't restore if in a recovery situation. You can't restore. So if let's say I'm on 7.2 and I want to go to 7.4, and on Saturday morning we do an upgrade to 7.4. and everything's great. We don't do a backup after the OS upgrade because we're a little short in time, and then Monday night we do our regular nightly backup. Tuesday night we do our regular nightly backup. We crash on Wednesday. To recover the system, you'd have to restore your full backup from that Friday beforehand. You'd have to then do your OS upgrade, and then you could restore your libraries from either Monday or Tuesday, because the system, the previous version, can't read that newer version's library header because it just doesn't know what that is. So remember, you can always read a previous save, but you can't read a future releases save. So it's important to get that that backup after the OS upgrade. And boy, if I can, I always want to get to 21. It just makes me more covered. And then I have a full starting ground. It just stops me from doing the Humpty Dumpty, putting all the pieces together. Because, you know, when you're looking at this diagram, you can see there's a lot of pieces to put back together. And if you're not used to doing these, you know, then it's going to become an issue. It's going to get a little confusing. This diagram certainly helps lay out the pieces, but you still need to know what to do, when to do it. Kind of tells you at the bottom left where Steve was going through, you know, the 21, and you get the idea, okay, well, if I saved it, I'm going to restore it. You pretty much do it in that same type of order as well. But it's important to understand the whole save, restore paradigm when you have to go to do it. So I'm going to quickly talk. Oh, and you know, one other thing, Steve, I want to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people like to do, and this kind of gets about save and restore, but it's not so much about this diagram. A lot of people like to do save changed object. And, you know, I'm not a big fan of save changed object. One, I think it makes your recovery too difficult. And if you look at people say, well, you know, I'm only going to back up the files that I change. Yes, that's 100% true. But probably the files that you change are your largest files on your system. Let's say it's an order header file or an order entry file or a history file. You change one record, right? One field inside of one record in that file, you're backing up the whole thing. That makes it completely different than if you just, I mean, it's the same thing. You're backing up the same file in that case. So the files that you probably aren't backing up are the files that you're not changing that much. Those tend not to be that big. At some customers where we had some issues with saves and restores and whatnot, we actually moved some of those into a secondary library, so we knew we didn't have to save that. And then in the case of a save, we were saving all the files in that one library every night. And then only that other library only had to be saved once a week because they weren't even changing that often. So I'm not a big fan about save changed object, only because if you look at this command, there's no command called restore changed object. Now, if you're using BRMS, BRMS takes care of it, because at the end of the BRMS, it backs up the catalog information. And that's the first thing you restore when you're restoring a BRMS system, so that then BRMS knows the intelligence of what it backed up to the end of the backup. That's why BRMS is so intelligent, because it already knows everything. It's kind of like the metadata. So BRMS makes your life really easy. I could use it, save changed object there, but not otherwise. Now, the save DLO, I'm going to quickly talk about that because, you know, some people still have some DLO objects. You need to save the DLO in order to recover it because there's pieces of the operating system in there. But, you know, quite honestly, if you're using the DLO, you really want to look at moving to an IFS based because those are much faster, give you more options in there. And I think it's a better use of those kinds of stream files and whatnot like that. You can have them in the DLO, but you're better off putting them in the IFS. You'll get much better performance from there.
Yeah.
So now, Steve, you're going to talk a little bit about the SAV.
Sure. So, you know, your SAV command is to back up your integrated file system. Now, under the root, you have access to your qsys.lib file system, essentially your libraries. You have access to qdls, which is essentially what you back up on a save DLO command. So when you're running the save command, you're always going to omit qsys.lib, and you're always going to omit qdls, because you're already getting those as part of your other backup and backup program components. Okay, so your save lib all user and save DLO respectively. So outside of that, your IFS is quite important. Okay, there's a lot of IBM stuff in there. There's a lot of user stuff in there. We see people that, I did a recovery for a guy about 1.5 years ago. He had everything. He had, user profiles and DLOs and user libraries and everything on the tape except for the IFS. And did he use the IFS? You better believe it. But I can only recover what you're backing up, right? So, that's the struggle. If you're not backing something up, there's no way you're going to bring it back. And you kind of got to deal with it. So from a save perspective or an SAV perspective, when you're writing that command up, it's a little snaky because it is kind of Unixy. Okay, it's looking for the direct path to your tape drive. It's not TAP01. It will be qsys.lib/tap01.devd for device description if tape01 is your tape drive device description. So when people look at that save command, it's kind of like looking at something in another language because it's so different from all the other save commands. It is that way by default. I'm not sure exactly why. They couldn't have said, well, what's my device name? It's TAP01. Okay, move on. But it's just the way it is. So don't discount your save command, because if that's not in your backup program on a nightly basis, you may be having things out there that you want to grab. Now, with the last couple of weeks, we've seen a real resurgence of malware. Okay, so what do you protect with your save command? You protect your IFS. What's in the IFS? It's your shared directories. Okay, so if you have directories that are shared via net server, and let's just say you have, let's say you have it wide open. Let's say you have the shipped authority on the root directory is read, write, execute, and every one of your file shares are start public read, write, execute. Maybe you've given that server a guest profile. So if you don't have credentials, hey, IBMI is going to supply it for you. That's a heck of a way to open up your system to a big vulnerability. So, when we do security assessments for people, recovery is always something that we talk about because usually the root authority is never changed. And seldom are the directory authority for the stuff that's shared by a net server. So your saving grace to any malware attack, okay, is going to be your ability to recover. In order to recover, you got to back that stuff up. So be very careful of what you're backing up.
Right. And you do need that IFS for something as simple as TCP to start. Because if you don't have your IFS on, TCP won't be able to start. So don't think you're going to be able to do FTPs or things like that. And some people do their system backups by FTP, and I always got to laugh at that because that's fine if you want to do a nightly backup. You're going to back up your file. You're going to put it to a save file and send it someplace. But you got to realize it's a chicken and an egg thing. You have to have your entire system back before you're going to start restoring that library back. Because you're not going to get that library back until you have all your licensed programs restored, your operating system, your LIC, and then you could restore that. So it's a valid thing to do. You just have to understand what you're doing and where that sits into the whole full system save and whatnot. So we kind of touched a lot about the save. I just wanted to hit a couple of things about the restore. Certainly you're going to restore your system, right? I mean, because when we talk about restores, and your restores is only as good as your backup. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you backed up your entire system in July of last year, and then in October you backed up Qusersys, and in November you backed up the LPPs once again, and then in December you backed up your user profiles, but every night you back up the database library. Think about putting that back together, right? That's a nightmare. And when you're talking about recovery, and understand that when it comes to recovery, if you can't recover your system, there's a good chance you're going to go out of business, because there's some crazy percentage of companies that can't recover, or and once they're out for 2 weeks, they're just done. They close their doors. So it really is important to test your recovery, and you're going to start that test. Obviously you don't want to if you have one partition in one system, you don't want to recover on the production system. You either want to rent a system someplace, we can help you with that, or if you have some other old hardware, maybe you could restore it on that. But you're going to start with restoring the system, and it's always easier if you have an HMC than if you just have a console, like a LAN console. Because remember, if you have to use a tape drive, you got to use a tape drive that you can point to. Otherwise, you're going to restore from the DVD. You're just going to do an IPL, a demode IPL from the alternate IPL device, then assign the tape drive as the alternate installation device, and then load the lick from the alternate installation device, and that's how you'll come back up. You'll IPL from that alternate device. You'll actually download the software, download the lick onto the disks, and then you'll IPL from the A side. When we talk about applying PTFs, I know we spent a lot of time in our virtual 2-day conference, we talked about this, a number of us did. If you are not applying those PTFs permanently, well, that's what you're going to get on the A side. You're just going to get what you haven't applied permanently. So you'll just get your permanently applied stuff. All your temp stuff is going to only be on the B side. So think about that. When you're doing your PTF methodology, you got to be cognizant of that, because that's going to come back at the end when you're doing save and restore. And once I'm going to use that OS tape or the save sys, right, I'm going to use that for my lick and my OS. And until I have those two, I don't really have commands or a command line or anything else. I need those down before I can actually start my restore 21, or however I did my backup. If you've done a backup as a 22 and a 23, you can't do a restore 21. You got to do a restore 22 and then a restore 23, right? Because of the way the data's out there. Because when it goes out and looks at the first file, and it's like sequence between 37 and 40, depending on what release you're on, that's going to be the libraries. And it's going to look for a file called qfile, and that's going to determine how the libraries were backed up. So if you backed them up non-sys, well, if you backed them up non-sys, which would be a 21, you could do either a 21, a 22, or a 23, or you could do a 21, then you could do a 22 and a 23 if you so wanted to. I'm not sure why you'd want to, but you have that ability. If you've done a 22 and a 23, you can't do a 21 restore. You have to do the 22 and the 23. So just some comments on that. Steve, anything else on restores?
No, I think that's about it for me, other than reiterating you can only restore what you backed up to begin with, right? So
correct. And as we saw last week, when a customer couldn't find their console, now that sounds kind of funny, but they didn't have a console. If you don't have a console, you're not restoring your system. So make sure you know how to get to your console. Make sure you get to it occasionally. Because when you IPL and you get to load the license internal code, it's going to go out and try to get to your console. You need to take options to be able to store the lick. Well, it's going to talk to that console. So you need to be cognizant how it's plugged in, what the IP address is. Now, your LAN console, whether you're using ACS or the old Access Client Solutions, whether you're using ACS or the old PC support one, it will keep the console attributes on the PC, and you'll be able to reconnect after you start the restore process. But make sure you have all that. Make sure you test your console occasionally. Because if you don't have that, boy, you are going to suffer. It's going to take you a long time to start rebuilding the system. Steve, we don't really have too many questions. I answered the questions as we were kind of coming through.
Okay.
If there's any questions, anybody can enter them now, because we do have just a couple of minutes. Kind of wanted to leave this to about 30 minutes.
We'll hang on for a couple of minutes. Yeah, reminded of a machine I looked at last summer. This guy wanted me to have a peek at it, Pete. And about 3 hours drive away, I went up, had a look. He was in a bad way, and they were backing everything up via FTP over to a network attached storage device about the size of an iPhone. The thing was on the network 10 feet away from the system, and busted disk drive, no console, and no ability to even get to the machine was broken. It was up and running, but it was just they had neglected it. It was a Power 5 and on 5.3, 5.4, something like that. And we were trying our hardest to get that darn thing up and going with a console. It was just, the OS was busted. No media, no nothing. And tape drive didn't work, DVD drive didn't work, and you wonder why they were backing everything up. And instead of fixing the problem, they said, well, we'll just back it up to the NAS. Well, you ran that, you push that boat out into the harbor as far as you can really do it without solving the actual problem to begin with. Right. And that's a console, that's a working tape drive, working DVD drive.
Yep. And I remember when you had that last year, we were on the phone a couple of times, and it kind of reminded me of something else just recently happening. And a customer this customer was actually moving to our cloud, and we were trying to get a backup. And I said to him, well, when was the last time you did a good backup? And they just didn't know. And they had a lot of damaged objects on their machine. If you're getting damaged objects, boy, you need to find out why, right? Don't just skip the objects that you're not backing up and say, well, I guess I don't need those. Well, you probably do. And sometimes you don't know what's actually damaged that's out there. So the best way to find damage, unfortunately, is to run a save, because it will back up everything. There's that other command that we talked about last week that you run in Q shell that does look at all the disks, and that's pretty good as well. But if you're getting objects that are not being backed up, then you definitely want to look at that backup and figure out why and get them resolved. I mean, maybe you had a hardware problem a couple of weeks ago, and now that's resolved. Sometimes you have to reinstall the operating system or do an upgrade in place so that you replace all the IBM I objects that may be damaged. If that's the case, we've done that quite a few times, and that resolves things, especially if you're getting some weird issues that are going on. But you have a hardware problem, get it fixed. If you have damaged objects, look into it and see why those objects are being damaged, and then resolve them. Oh, there are a couple of questions. I didn't go any below.
Oh, there you go.
That's a good one. Would you like to give a quick overview of the allow save attribute for the IFS objects? Steve, do you know that one, or I'll take it if you don't?
I didn't read it, so you go right ahead.
Okay. So the allow save attribute tells whether you want that object to be saved in the IFS. So you can set objects so that they're not saved, which is great if you don't need them. And there are about 50 objects that IBM delivers as non-saved, because you don't need to save them, because when you do a restore, it actually will rebuild them. But you can also do that. So we create a lot of image catalogs. We set our image catalogs to say not to save, because we don't want to save 15 gigabytes, or sometimes on some of our partitions where we have a whole bunch of different releases, it may be 200 or 300 gigabytes of image catalogs. We don't need to save that, because we could just rebuild them when we're doing that. So that's what the allow save attribute actually can help you with.
It's funny where you're going to see that. If you're running your full system save after a 7.3 upgrade, you can tell who's paying attention to the save output, because when they're reading through the output, it'll say, this object wasn't saved, this object wasn't saved. And they're like, hold on now, these things aren't being saved ever since I did the upgrade. It's like, okay, great. You're actually reading the darn log, and you can tell, and that's why, because they're marked to not be saved.
Right. And there's one other thing. Oh, here's a good one for you. How can you tell when the last backup was done? I
Which
assume this is a
backup?
customer that doesn't have our Verify product.
Oh yeah, yeah. Download Verify and it'll show you on there. Actually, so there are a bunch of data areas in QSys, I believe, and it's Q save sys. That'll tell you when your last actual save sys was done. Q save config. There are probably 6 or 7 of them in that directory. So if you just do a work object and with the attribute for a data queue, so work object Q save splat asterisk, you'll pull those up, and if you look at the last save date of those objects, that will tell you the last time those particular commands were run or menu options were run. Unless you're running like BRMS, I don't think the BRMS product writes to those directories the same way the IBM commands do. So just be wary of that fact.
Right. And one time we were doing a question and answer, and somebody had a question on that because they were looking at the contents of the data area versus the save date on that data area. So that's where we're coming from as well. And we will get this chart out. Vanessa will send this out to everyone. And I think there's one other thing I want to talk about, which probably is to speed up your IFS saving. And there's the parameter on the command. I can't remember what it is. Steve, do you remember what it is?
It is asynchronous bring.
Yes, asynchronous bring.
But
and your mileage may vary, right? Not everybody gets great results with it, but we've seen quite a few customers set up async bring, and it will save 30% on their IFS, the save time on there. So it's certainly really good. It's kind of like it's pre-reading the directories and getting it faster. So IBM states it can be slower. I've yet to ever see anybody slower, but if IBM tells you it could be slower, there's probably a couple of instances out there where it can be. But we've seen some great results on that. That command, that parameter came available in 6.1, and then it was added to 7.1 for BRMS and stuff like that. Some BRMS result didn't have it, but you could actually turn a data area. But if you're on 6.1 right now, you probably don't need to worry about the data area. You probably need to worry about getting off 6.1. That's probably bigger concern than anything else. You should be on at least a supported release. And people always ask me, what release should I be on? And I say, look, I don't care if you're on 7.3 or 7.4, but get to a supported release. You shouldn't be on 7.1 or anything below it right now. And if you're on 7.2, you got another 8 months before that's out of support. And I just wouldn't feel comfortable running my company on an unsupported release. I just think that's asking for trouble.
Yeah.
I think that's it. So, a couple of people actually did the async bring. So, good comments on there.
And their brains are working a little faster than mine are today.
So yeah, there's actually any thoughts on, there's a program called QSRSAV21 in that, actually it gives you all the information on there. That's pretty cool to do because it gives you breaks down some information. I think that's it. So Steve, thanks again. You did a great job.
Thank you.
And we have some other tips and tricks webinars coming up. We have tomorrow we have unlocking the value of open source with IBM services. This is kind of a little bit different. This is really not so much a technical, but it does tell you if you want to use open source with IBM, this is where you can get additional support. And we're going to go over all the options that are available to support you in this endeavor. So that's a great thing. Then next Thursday, this Thursday, wow, time's really flying. Amy's going to do how to check Mimic's replication status, and she'll go over a few things. Tomorrow, IBM's going to come out with the new technology refresh. So it's kind of be like goodie time at the at Christmas time. So we're going to see some really cool things for the new technology refreshes. And Steve and I actually already have our stuff that we like for our cool things for the new technology refresh. So we're going to talk about that next Monday. And then Amy's going to do high availability versus disaster recovery plans. So kind of understand the differences between that. We got some bad things that can happen to your system when no one is paying attention. So we'll do that 2 Mondays from now. And then we have a webinar. We have a couple of webinars scheduled as well. So we got quite a few things we're trying to bring you during the coronavirus time, and we just wish that everybody stays safe, and we hope to see everybody in person as soon as possible. And until that time, we're going to continue to bring as much education to you and help you with everything you need when it comes to IBMI. Thanks. Have a great day.
Cheers, everybody.